2026 started fairly well for the aviation industry. Airlines were posting record passenger numbers, profits were fairly stable, and demand was resilient. IATA Director General Willie Walsh says the landscape shifted in late February.
The industry started well, and then we had the issues of the war in Iran and the impact that that had on the fuel price. So obviously fuel price increases are very difficult when they happen in such a short period like we've seen this year for the industry to deal with that.
Tehran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz cut off 20% of the world's oil supplies. But more critically, it choked off refined jet fuel supplies as well, meaning even airlines that had oil hedges had to pay more to keep their planes in the air. I'm Arnold Gay on the CNA Correspondent podcast. We joined Yasmin Jonkers in Rio de Janeiro by Zoom, so slightly different from our usual, where she's been speaking to airline bosses at the industry's biggest annual gathering. Yasmin, hello. So tell me about these meetings in Rio. You had the IATA AGM. There was the World Transport Summit as well. Would you call them crisis meetings, or would you say the industry is still confident?
They weren't crisis meetings. Yeah, in a sentence, that's how I would reply. I could just see everybody was generally upbeat. It was very dynamic. Lots of people sort of striking deals or wanting to have ideas about how to grow their markets, grow their airlines. Demand is very strong, as you said, Arnold. Really, that's why everybody's so upbeat. This time around as well, remember, the world is not in a lockdown. People have to travel. They want to travel. They can travel. Lots of people can't afford things, and companies can pay. Passenger traffic remains especially resilient in Asia Pacific, the region we are in, supported by continued demand for longer haul international travel as well. Airlines are just very mindful that they have to cut operating costs in order to survive. And when I spoke to Willie Walsh, he was very careful to correct me because I had used the word crisis, just as you did, a few times. And I said, Mr. Walsh, what do you think of the jet fuel crisis? He stopped me and he had this to say.
I wouldn't define this as a crisis. I think this is challenging. In an environment where the industry is still expected to be profitable in the year, I don't think you can say that's a crisis. It's a challenging environment that we're in, but it's definitely a short-term opportunity for carriers in the region. I think we've seen Singapore in particular respond to that very quickly. You've got to give credit to them. They were probably the first to recognize that there was an opportunity to increase capacity into Europe, given the impact on the disruption in the Gulf, and they've done that very well.
So lots of confidence there, as you can hear, Arnold. But that said, I have to say, airline CEOs weren't as forthright about speaking to CNA this time around. So lots turned us down. And in fact, I met some really face-to-face and asked them point blank. The new Qantas CEO, Vanessa Hudson, I was on the same flight with her from Santiago to Rio de Janeiro. She was very nice to me. She took my name card, but she firmly said, no media interviews this time round. There were some European airlines that said yes initially and then canceled at the last minute. Mm-hmm. And of course, the Middle East carriers, they were nowhere to be found. Maybe they were hiding, and I wanted to find them. I walked down the aisle yesterday of all the hospitality suites. It said Emirates, it said Qatar. I looked in. Nobody.
So here's one thing that still puzzles me, Yasmin. When the war first broke out, in my head, and I know my friends were thinking the same thing as well, oh no, we're not going to be able to travel anymore because, plane tickets are going to be too expensive. But the strange thing is they have gone up, but they are still, I guess you could say, relatively affordable. So my question is, I guess there are two parts to this. Why is that? And is the situation going to stay the same, meaning they are going to continue to stay affordable?
Well, the thing is, Arnold, a lot of people book their tickets in advance, right, to get good fares, especially if you're traveling in big groups and you want that trip of a lifetime. A lot of good airlines in the world honor the fares, right? It taught them to hold on to passengers, keep people loyal. So what do? They take care of themselves. They cut their own costs so that they don't have to, make the passengers pay so much. They cut their operating costs. They trim their thin routes. They add profitable routes. Singapore Airlines, for example, upping flights to Amsterdam to cater for the long-haul summer travel. They deploy the right aircraft for different routes as well. And believe me, these fare adjustments, they're made not across the board. Generally, economy fares are safe. Where you get the hikes are the premium travel classes, business class, first class, long haul trips. You might get stuck with higher fares if you're going in those classes of travel. Something that airlines are doing right now, and I realized this here at IATA, they talk so much about these new cabins. Like ANA did a whole presentation about beautiful new cabins that are coming out in business class by summer this year. They moved really quick. SIA's announced refreshed cabins. Emirates is having a current TV marketing campaign about how they've got refreshed cabins, especially the premium ones, to give perceived better value. So basically, yeah, you pay more, but you're going to get to sit in a nicer seat. And then countries like Japan, they try to keep the faith of their customers by being as transparent as possible. I spoke with Ross Leggett of Japan Airlines, and he explained how they do that.
So the calculation for our fuel surcharge is actually being pre-approved by the Japanese government. It's quite transparent, and we base it on the cost of Singapore kerosene. And then using our operational costs, we have a table of surcharges which we publish on the net. Anybody can see at what price the fuel is, then the fuel surcharge goes. So that very difficult balancing between increasing fares and reducing passenger demand. So far, we've been seeing no softness. The market has absorbed the increases so far, particularly for passengers arriving into Japan, so the inbound market for us, that the yen depreciation continues. So with a very depreciated currency, the market can absorb the increase so far. Yeah.
Well, I think you can sense there's a lot of passenger care there, and I think people appreciate the transparency and they'll stay loyal.
Okay, it doesn't change the fact, though, that fuel costs for airlines are going up, and they may keep going up depending on the situation in the Middle East. So the question I have then is, who's best positioned and who's most exposed and could be in trouble very soon?
The best positioned ones are the airlines with the strong fuel hedging programs, meaning they lock in their fuel prices months or years in advance. You would have heard fuel hedging in so many sort of airline reports these days. The airlines that are very famous for doing this are Qantas, Singapore Airlines, and the European low-cost carriers, EasyJet and Ryanair. It helps, of course, if they have these newer fuel-efficient fleets as well. Some airlines have made a whole history of always refreshing their fleets. The most exposed ones are the airlines with little or no fuel hedging, and this is where I bring up Spirit Airlines that folded. Already it was financially weak before the fuel shock, and industry executives warned that budget airlines with weak balance sheets could also struggle. I spoke with Wong Hong, the new chief of AAPA.
I would say if you look at low-cost carriers relative to legacy carriers, they certainly would feel the brunt of the impact on operating costs, especially when I understand that many of them do not really hedge. Well, even legacy carriers don't always hedge. So if you look at how low-cost carriers are operating and the capacity adjustments they have had to make over the last 2 months or so, you would start to actually understand, it's really affecting them to a larger extent compared to the legacy airlines.
Fuel costs aside, Yasmin, how much more complicated is flying today? I mean, you have the situation in the Middle East. Before that, you had Ukraine. There's also this great plane shortage I keep hearing about. Can you sort of update us about what it's like flying today?
Backlog of deliveries now stands at over 18,000, which means to say that airlines that have paid deposits for these planes that they want so very much have to be so very patient. And then there's the complexity of airspace restrictions. It means these longer and more expensive flights. But this is an industry of great navigators, Arnold. So where there's demand and where there is a will, there will be a way to travel to wherever you have to go. Airlines accept that operations have become a constant balancing act. They've kind of built it into their DNA. So yeah, it's complex, but they have to do it. CEOs are so busy fighting fires. Airlines are just happy that, everybody still wants to travel. They'll try and serve the passengers. And really a lot are leaning on AI, I discovered, to help in passenger reroute management whenever there's a crisis, whenever things become complex. And the AI also apparently really helps in customer service so that airline executives get to free up their time to focus on bigger things. As for the fleet renewal, the lack of new planes means that airlines have fewer spare aircraft available for contingency. Plane makers, it's interesting, they made a beeline to talk to CNA, unlike a year ago. All that backlog means fat order books for them, so they're happy. There are even more orders reported from Embraer to me at this IATA meeting. Boeing, they're very happy with their 200 order from China that will open more doors. And Airbus is here to explain what sounds like a sales pitch, but airlines really believe this pitch, and they put their orders in.
There are two major topics of conversation. The first is the fuel crisis, which is going on right now. And for that, the way we address it is through providing our latest next generation products, which are fuel efficient and which significantly help the airlines combat this crisis. The second area which most of the airlines bring up is the demand. As I mentioned, Asia Pacific has a demand of 20,000 aircraft. And we are ramping up our industrial base to ensure we're able to produce and deliver aircraft to meet these requirements of the airlines.
Anand Stanley from Airbus there. And interestingly, 2 years ago, I couldn't speak to plane makers. Now Airbus, Boeing, and Embraer all spoke to me this time around at IATA.
Okay, so we've talked about fuel, we've talked about finances, we've talked about the production backlog. I'm wondering if the pressure that airlines have faced for some time now to cut their emissions is part of the conversation as well, or has that kind of like gone into KIV, because of the situation in the Middle East and of course the discussions about, previously anyway, over who should be paying for cleaner skies?
Yeah, that's right. I guess that's the whole story of sustainable aviation fuel levies. There were airports that wanted to charge that. Singapore, for example, putting it on hold. So as you say, a lot of KIV in this story of climate, but they're still trying, and there is an eye to make traveling, more green in the future. IATA is very disappointed that there's been a clawback on all the fuel gains that the aviation industry have made in the year 2024 and 2025. These delays are now causing more maintenance and leasing costs.
So one other issue which I keep reading about, Yasmin, is when you put all these challenges together, and there's so many reports which suggest, I don't know if this is true, which suggest that flying could become a luxury again. And I think you touched on this before as well earlier when you talked about how they're making business travelers, making first class travelers pay more for their seats and for the perks. Could we come to a situation where only the rich can fly?
I don't actually think so. The way I see it, travel is seen as a democratic right in this present era. Travel is going to remain an economic and social enabler. It came about in so many speeches at the meetings in the past few days. Travel creates jobs, it connects businesses, it connects communities. Everybody believes in this very strongly. And demand remains strong. Demand is going to remain strong in the future and the few years to come. If you think about, markets, Arnold, which have had huge parts, or which have currently huge parts of the population that have never traveled before. India, China, people are dying to get on those first flights. You don't have to go long haul. You start domestic. Those who've flown domestic want to try something else and go even further. The thing is, as the divide grows, that's probably going to be it, that, premium travel is going to be of a different class. There are also those who pay less, but they get what they paid for, because there will be the correct plane for you. I think plane makers are getting very innovative. They want as many people to fly as possible because it's a democratic right. They have the right planes to suit these thinner routes. They have the right planes to suit people who can't pay as much. Planes are going to be fitted for all sorts of travelers. You must have seen photos of, planes made with these sort of bunk type beds, standing flights, where you sort of lean and you
Yep.
strap in just for
Pretty-
like a 45-minute jump.
Pretty scary, though.
It's pretty scary. I wouldn't do it. I'd like to sit down and like to have my feet on the ground
Absolutely,
and rest
yeah.
my butt somewhere. If that's all that's available to you for that cohort of people from one village to another, you'll just do it, So it's not going to be that big luxury. I don't believe so. I think there will be a class of travel for you, no matter how much you have to pay. But Arnold, where travel could struggle, it's interestingly in Japan, because I discovered that there's a little bit of a phenomenon there. I mean, no thanks to the record low yen, which makes the domestic travel market shrink, I found out that there's a demographic that doesn't even want to travel. Take a listen.
I think a lot of that has been a change in Japanese mindset, in thinking that international travel is not as attractive as what it was before. We have seen that shift to domestic travel, so for leisure travel within Japan has actually increased past 2019 levels. So we're seeing that change. But it's ongoing as well. And I think the biggest challenge for us will be, how do we encourage young Japanese people to travel more? That at the moment, the passport holder percentage in Japan is about 25%, I think, which is quite low. So we need to stimulate people to travel more, stimulate young people to travel more, and to get that more wanderlust to want to travel internationally again.
So 20-somethings in Japan, Arnold, the wanderlust for travel has gotten killed. Do you know 20-somethings who don't want to travel?
Not many. I mean, there are one or two, but they are by far in the minority in terms of the young people I know.
Yeah, and to have, a national program to actually encourage 20-somethings to travel, the Japanese government going as far as to consider, lowering the cost of making an international passport to hopefully stimulate travel. That's really something. And imagine what it's like to be so insular in your 20s and what that would mean for the future.
Can't imagine what that's like. Hopefully, these programs are going to be successful and flying will continue to be in demand and popular. Yasmin, thank you so much. I'm Arnold Gay. See you on the next CNA Correspondent podcast. This was brought to you by Tiffany Ang, Nat Fetul Vero, Sikri Iman, and Craig Dale.